protection of privacy events which marked 2023. January 2023, public debate continued about the law on internal affairs as well as on the introduction of biometric surveillance and system for biometric face recognition. Although the surveillance equipment was purchased, the fate of the draft is not known. March 2023, OpenAI company launched ChatGPT-4, an advanced system that can follow the intentions of the users as well as to search the internet in real time. In the same month, the Serbian government adopted the ethical guidelines for development, implementation and use of artificial intelligence. May 2023, mass murders in Belgrade, Malorech and Dubona was marked by numerous violations of privacy of victims, witnesses and perpetrators. The head of the Belgrade police, tabloids and the president of the state publicized the parts of the investigation as well as private information about the families of the perpetrators, their names, business, that is jobs and salaries. August 2023, the Serbian government adopted a new strategy of personal data protection. The strategy says that the Serbian legislation is not fully in harmonization with the GDPR and that the prosecutors should take a more active role and that more cases before courts need to be resolved. TV Pink showed false video recordings of opposition leaders. Video recordings were made with the assistance of deepfake technology, and this should be clearly marked, which is not the case here. REM reacted to the incident only after the public pressure. December 2023, early parliamentary elections were marked by numerous irregularities, including the violations of the law on personal data protection. The signatures of support to election lists were forged. The dialogue on the introduction of biometric surveillance and system for automatic recognition of faces, speedy development of artificial intelligence, a new strategy of development of personal data, creation of recordings and images through deepfake technology, violation of the law on personal data protection during the election campaigns in Serbia. Welcome to the 2024 Privacy Week. We start 2024 with the fourth Privacy Week, and with the experts from the civil, private and public sector, we will talk about the most topical issues from the field of privacy protection and events that marked last year and continue to affect the trends in the implementation of standards of personal data protection in Serbia. In the next 3 days, we will talk about the role of personal data in the global election year, reporting of the media and protection of privacy, court protection of the right to privacy, cyber attacks as a form of violation of personal data, revenge pornography, future of digital surveillance, artificial intelligence, innovations, ethics. This year's Privacy Week was organized with the support of the Dutch Embassy to the Republic of Serbia, the Ministry of Affairs of the Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Norway, American Bar Association, and Foundation for Open Society Serbia. We owe special thanks to our partner organizations that played a big role in the creation of contents and organization of this event. The OSCE, Mission to Serbia, Balkan Investigative Network of Serbia, DIT Institute, and Association for Harmonization in, that is for compliance in business operation, media partners, TVN1, Danas Portal, and Nedeljnik Weekly. Before we begin with the first panel, we would ask our distinguished guests to address us and officially open the Privacy Week. We will now watch the video address of the head of the OSCE mission to Serbia, Jan Bratu. Poštovana gospođo Toskić, poštovane kolege, dragi prijatelji, verovanje da je privatnost ljudsko pravo po prvi put je izraženo 1890. godine u jednom članku objavljenom u Harvard Law Review koji su napisala dva mlada pravnika iz Sjedinjenih.
Instantaneous photographs and newspaper enterprise have invaded the sacred precincts of private and domestic life, and numerous mechanical devices threaten to make good the prediction that what is whispered in the closet shall be proclaimed from the housetops. For years, there has been a feeling that the law must afford some remedy for the unauthorized circulation of portraits of private persons and the evil of invasion of privacy by the newspapers, long keenly felt, and as has been recently discussed, unquote. The authors noted that, quote, recent inventions and business methods call attention to the next step which must be taken for the protection of the person and for securing to the individual what Judge Cooley calls the right to be alone. Indeed, the more things change, the more they appear to be the same. Dear colleagues, against this historical backdrop, it is my pleasure to greet you at the opening of the 2024 Privacy Week. As was noted by Brandeis and Warren in 1890, technological change brings with it new challenges to the law and indeed to the protection of the right to privacy. Let there be no mistake, privacy is a fundamental human right. Privacy allows us individuality and dignity and the space conducive to exercising our personal freedom. Some would even argue that privacy of the individual is essential for a functioning democratic society. The right to privacy is enshrined in international treaties, including the International Declaration of Human Rights, Article 12, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the European Convention on Human Rights, the OSCE Copenhagen Document of 1990, and not the least, the Council of Europe's Convention 108 on the protection of individuals with regard to automatic processing of personal data. While Brandeis and Warren were concerned by the encroachment of the media of the 1890s into the private sphere of individuals, in our age, the right to privacy is more related to the pervasive reach of governments and increasingly also that of big business. Privacy rights protect the public from unlawful and unnecessary government and business surveillance. However, new digital ecosystems exacerbate many existing challenges to human rights online, while giving rise to new ones. They have paved the way for new methods for monitoring and influencing expression of views. Algorithms and artificial intelligence have entered the scene and are increasingly prevalent. The use of automated contact governance is difficult to monitor and regulate, and authorities are lagging behind the pace of technological change. Respect for human rights, including the right to personal data protection, is integral to the OSCE's comprehensive security approach. The OSCE participating states' commitment to practical cooperation in the areas of information access and privacy protection underscores the importance of a collaborative, interdisciplinary approach. As Serbia makes noticeable progress in the area of new technologies, it is also making efforts to address the challenges these pose. It is the first country in the region to adopt an artificial intelligence strategy, and its national strategy for personal data protection, adopted in August 2023, serves as the foundation for regulating issues such as the use of artificial intelligence and video surveillance. Their application should ensure a higher level of data protection for citizens in line with current European and international standards. As recommended by the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media, participating states should uphold the absolute right to freedom of opinion and emphasize the right to privacy without interference. This approach should guide our country's policies, shaped through transparent, evidence-based, and inclusive processes. I welcome this year's Privacy Week program as an important contribution to the debate and to public knowledge on the right to privacy and personal data protection. The state of personal data protection, the future of the region in the EU digital single market, and the impact of the new EU legislation are particularly timely topics to be discussed. Civil society, industry, academia, and digital gatekeepers play significant roles in the areas of public information, data protection, and the security of our societies. Respect for human rights, including freedom of expression and privacy, should also be embedded in corporate responsibility, both with companies and governments. I'd like to end by thanking the organizers, Partners for Democratic Change Serbia, for providing their expertise and making a forum for discussion with the experts from civil, private, and public sectors. Our partnership is achieving tangible results, raising awareness in support of the objectives set by the National Strategy for Personal Data Protection. The 25 participants, students, researchers, young lawyers of our second annual privacy school are receiving their certificates this week. Hopefully, they will use their new skills to contribute to the evolution of data protection for the benefit of citizens. The OSCE mission to Serbia will continue to support and work with all our partners on providing knowledge, bringing together local, regional, and international expertise, and linking media, civil society, and state institutions and academia. I wish you all interesting discussions and contributions to advancing the right to privacy. Thank you.
Zahvaljujemo se gospodinu Bratu na izdvojenom
We would like to thank Mr. Bratu for the time that he has taken. The Embassy of the Kingdom of Netherlands in Serbia supports the efforts of Partner Serbia, BIRN, and SHARE foundations for the promotion of standards of privacy protection in media reporting. I would like to ask the representative of the Embassy of the Kingdom of Netherlands to take the floor.
Back as well. Yeah. I have a written speech for today. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, esteemed participants, I'm honored to be here and speak to you about a cause that is at the forefront of a rapidly evolving digital landscape: the importance of data privacy. In an era where our lives are woven into the fabric of technology, of our personal information has never been more crucial. Data has become a commodity of immeasurable value. High-profile data breaches affecting both individuals and major corporations and governments serve as a stark reminders of the vulnerabilities we face in our interconnected world. The emergence of cutting-edge technologies, such as artificial intelligence, presents boundless opportunities, but also introduces new challenges. Striking the right balance between innovation and safeguarding privacy is imperative. In the Netherlands, Serbia, and all over the world, the increasing reliance on digital platforms and services has prompted a renewed focus on protecting individual privacy. Legislative initiatives, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, have set a gold standard for data protection globally. Further to this, as we navigate this dynamic landscape, empowering individuals with knowledge about their rights and the tools available to protect their privacy has become essential. This is why events like the Privacy Week play a pivotal role in fostering a privacy-conscious society. In the coming days, you will explore and deliberate upon various dimensions of privacy, from global elections to the future of digital surveillance. Let me reflect upon a couple of topics on the agenda that I find especially relevant. The first topic of discussion revolves around the role of personal data in elections. In an era where information is a potent tool, it's indeed important to scrutinize how personal data influences electoral processes on a global scale. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for upholding the principles of democracy and ensuring fair, transparent elections. The price of privacy is the topic that demands our attention. In a world where data is often commodified, we must examine the costs borne by individuals when the private information becomes a trade asset. Such commodification, as one calls it, has economic and social implications that we need to shed light on. That brings me to judicial protection of privacy. Our legal systems play a vital role in safeguarding individual privacy, so it's our obligation to delve into the current landscape of privacy laws, evaluate their effectiveness, and consider potential enhancements necessary to address the challenges posed by the digital era. Image-based sexual abuse is a grave concern, one that underscores the intersection of technology privacy and consent. We must explore how technical innovations are used to impede female privacy and infringe upon personal boundaries. Also, we should come up with potential countermeasures and legal frameworks to combat this alarming issue. Looking forward to the future, the evolving landscape and the ethical implications of digital surveillance make for an inevitable topic of discussion. In an era of constant connectivity and evolving technologies, we must ask ourselves, what lies ahead in terms of surveillance practices? And how can we balance security with individual privacy? In conclusion, the importance of data privacy cannot be overstated. It is not merely a matter of compliance with regulations, but a fundamental aspect of human rights in the digital age, as was also expressed by the previous speaker. Let us work together to build a future where innovation thrives in harmony with protection of our most precious asset, our individual privacy. Finally, on behalf of the Embassy of the Netherlands, I would like to thank Bern and partner Serbia and all their local and international partners for organizing this year's conference. We are happy as the Netherlands to be part of it and co-fund it through our MATRA program. Thank you very much.
Smart Balkans, Kraljevina Norveške, podržava istraživanje i druge aktivnosti
Smart Balkans, through Smart Balkans, the Kingdom of Norway supports research and other activities of partner Serbia.
I think I'd like to start today with a fun fact that I discovered some days ago. And that is that on average, we humans, we spend 7 hours a day on screens. And I found this fact quite astonishing, and it really made me think about how much of our lives that we actually spend online today. And I think our lives today are completely dependent and almost unthinkable without digital technology. And as all of us know, it enables us to communicate, to learn, to work, and to be entertained. And it also empowers us to express our opinions and participate in democratic processes. However, and as my colleagues here has also mentioned, the use of digital technologies also poses significant threats to our privacy and security. The incredible amount of time that we spend online today produces vast amount of data that is very easily exploited. And personally, I often find myself navigating something that often feels like a labyrinth when it comes to protecting my own data online. Sometimes I try to employ measures such as tell them not to store cookies, or I use incognito mode, but very often this feels like battling a lion with a toothpick, you know. So I think that the real responsibility for this really lies with governments to implement robust legislation. And I think we need regulations that respects the privacy and the rights of us, the data subjects, by ensuring that we have the information, the choice, and control to access, to correct, to delete, and transfer our data. And I think that in Norway, general data protection for us as citizens has really been greatly improved after we implemented the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. And also, Norway are a proud donor and sponsor on this topic here in Serbia by supporting partners Serbia, as mentioned, through our regional program, the Smart Balkans. Partners Serbia aims to improve the legal framework and implementation and the public awareness on data privacy and protection in Serbia. And I would like to congratulate them for their excellent work and achievements and for organizing Privacy Week 2024. So I wish you all an interesting and thought-provoking conference. Thank you.
Sa nama je ove godine Brankica Janković.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Vage. We have Ms. Brankica Jankovic, Commissioner for the Protection and Equality this year as well, and partner Serbia have been cooperating with these independent institutions on enlightening the link between the data breach, personal data breach, and discrimination, and discussion about new technologies and their impact on human rights. Thanks a lot, and thanks to partner Serbia, and thanks to you, Mrs. Toskic, for the invitation to participate this year as well. I believe that Mr. Milosavljevic and I are part of the standing lineup for this event. We've been together all these years, and it's very important to persist on this topic, regardless of the impression that the immediate future seems like utopia when it comes to the protection of privacy. But we have to stress this year as well that the right to privacy is one of the fundamental human rights aimed at protecting moral and spiritual integrity. And one of the more comprehensive definition that I would like to recall is that the right to privacy is defined as control about totality of manifestations of human existence. It includes control over the amount of information about us that will be made public or made known to part of the public, and also the control information that reaches us. This is often overlooked. And I think it's very important to talk about the relationship between the right to privacy, the right to equality, and ban on discrimination, because the violation of the right to privacy is just one step away very often from discrimination and violation of our right to equality. And it's commonly known that surveillance or restriction of the private sphere of an individual has an impact on reducing the private space and the freedom of religion, and limits the exercise of other rights. So this is the consequence of somebody having our personal data. And I will mention just several reasons why the right to privacy is important from the standpoint of equality. First and foremost, it prevents the interference of the state with the sphere of privacy. It prevents unauthorized use of data for the interest of other groupings, and also enables control over the use of our data. It contributes to the freedom of expression, contributes to the freedom and development of democratic processes, so the secrecy of ballot, first and foremost, and it contributes to different aspects of personal security. I believe that previous speakers already mentioned that. And that also reduces risk factors for different disadvantaged and marginalized, especially sensitive groups. There is some truth to the claim that we live at a time of post-privacy. I believe that Alina managed to illustrate that by reminding us how much we are present in the online world nowadays, and it's difficult to assess how much of our data is circulating out there. And some say that it's really an illusion to expect that we can control our data, bearing in mind the speed of circulation of data, of information, the amount of information that we ourselves, by clicking certain tabs or links, when we accept cookies and thank you for the reminder how it actually looks like in reality. I believe that most of us are really not aware of the extent to which our data is traded. And I think it's the most adequate expression for what's going on today. And we thus arrive to the negative phenomenon that we mentioned, that is the production of consent. I think we mentioned that last year, that we mentioned this piece of information, that one person needs 30 working days a year to read privacy policies for 40 most popular websites in the world. I think that nothing has changed since last year. We are not faster as human beings, so we would probably need another 30 days, or maybe even 31 days, because we can no longer achieve what is expected of us. But thank you, Anna. Maybe AI will do something about that, artificial intelligence, so welcome to the world of AI. And I think we should recall that, recall the hacking attacks against some government agencies in recent days, and also attacks against public enterprises. And it's very possible and probable that a big quantity of our personal data was abused or could be abused. And the time is coming that we will probably see what's going on actually. And we were witnesses very often of different types of abuse, precisely by those who are expected to protect our data. So I'm a big lover of poetry, and I like these illustrations. So John Barlow, a poet and essayist from the States, was right in saying, trusting the state to protect your privacy, it's the same like expecting a voyeur to put blinds on your windows. So we should not surrender, and that's why we are together this year, to see how to go on, how to fight for the most adequate way to protect our privacy. And just to recall, we were historically aware of different persecutions arising from certain pieces of data that were disclosed about our ethnicity or sexuality or the political opinion. And we were aware of the abuse of dating applications, mostly data disclosed through these networks were used to dismiss people, particularly people belonging to the LGBT plus group. And also in the practice of our commissioner's office, we had cases where different violations of the right to privacy were the introduction to discrimination. And my colleague Banyac will present our examples from practice in one of the panels. So I will not do that today. And I will recall that our public space is still characterized by often frequent insulting of women, use of improper vocabulary, and use of what we define in our anti-discrimination law as degrading and humiliating conduct, and very often it's hate speech. So we were using all available mechanisms. Sometimes that involved the opinions that we issued and the declaration of discrimination, or we warned the public. We sent out public warnings very often, condemning such a phenomenon, or to advocate for its ban and to indicate its detrimental effect on society. So in this digital era, we all need, including institutions, in an increasing amount of exchange of knowledge and experience. And I want to say that any example that was bad in practice had its good, strong points. We learned something from that as well. So Aline from the Norway Embassy is next to me. I need to mention several training courses that were organized within the European Equality Bodies Network, and these courses were devoted to this link between personal data discrimination. And my colleague Georg Todden, a Norway ombudsman, helped a lot in that respect. He was the Commissioner for the Protection of Personal Data, so he presented their practice and illustrated how much these two rights are interdependent and interlinked. And we work a lot on the spirit of our institutions. We don't have the right to give up, regardless of the gravity of the situation. We have to acquire new knowledge, new skills. We will not give up, definitely. And in conclusion, I want to say that the right to privacy is our right. It's something that we need to protect, and we're entitled to its protection. And nobody has the right to criticize us and to ask, what's the problem? What do you have to hide? We want to hide. We don't want to disclose our personal data. We are entitled to our privacy sphere because our personality is not a government authority. The government authority has the obligation to be transparent, to make its work transparent, to share all the information that the public is interested in. So that's a completely different situation. The government has the obligation to work transparently. So this is something that we need to work on the transparency work, to restore the confidence in institutions that has been undermined. And also, there is a big obligation of all us, particularly today, to pay a lot of attention and to find the most adequate way to approach children and the young. I really believe that they are not aware of what privacy means and what it means to violate privacy. It seems that younger generations find it quite okay to make everything transparent. So that is taking us to an even more complicated and more dangerous time. So I would like to thank for this new opportunity to talk about the right to privacy and all aspects of the violation of these rights. Thank you, Mr. Jankovic. As we mentioned several times before, the Open Society Foundation, we have an executive director, Miodrag Milosavljevic, and the foundation, Open Society Foundation, is the first donor that recognized 14 years ago the importance of the data protection for the broader protection of human rights and the rule of law in the country. Since then, partners Serbia and the FOST have been trying to put the issue of personal data protection in the focus of it, and to improve the capacities of the institution to protect the rights and raise the awareness. I'm glad to have this opportunity to be here and to greet you all. It's not nice to hear this reminder of time, particularly because in all 14 years I was involved in this cooperation. And I want to thank partners for the partnership, and I believe that we are building this. We've been building this partnership over years, and it's improving, and it's proven by results, and I will mention some of them today. When you talk about in this type of panels, the closer you are towards the end of the introductory panel, the more difficult it is to you, because everything has been mentioned, so you have to pick the crumbs and just throw an idea or two and try to pick up certain things. And we've here today to talk about a very complex topic. It's complex because it includes many contradictory aspects. Let's start with us. We're here in a select group of people, small group of people, and from that narrow context, we will talk about a global topic, huge topic. So our reach from that standpoint is very limited. So many of those that we're talking about who are trying to abuse our data never stepped into the jurisdiction, which is the jurisdiction of Ms. Brankica Jankovic. They don't know about Serbia. They don't recognize Balkans or Western Balkans. And we also have these villains and robbers of data, and this saying about what you sow you will harvest, it does not work when it comes to data. So this is the context that we will be talking in, and we will try to address these topics. And since this is the marking of the International Privacy Day, and we mark it as a Privacy Week, I think it's important maybe to think about declaring a Privacy Year, because this topic has to be present throughout the year, as previous speakers mentioned. I believe that these questions that we're trying to answer today are probably topics for discussions in many other languages, in many other places all over the world. And we can talk about ways to improve our responses to this challenge. I can just frown at Ms. Brankic and say, what's been done by the Commissioner for Equality has not been done, and she should work better. Maybe she will improve certain things. But these other players, they do not really have an ear for what we have to say. They do not hear what we are saying. So in Open Society Fund, one of the responses to this challenge is European integration. If we can continue our European integration process, Serbia will no longer be forced as an isolated territory, a small state which is not even seen in the annual accounts, which will be part of a stronger group with better grounds for negotiations with global cooperation. European Union is heard by these corporations because they want to do business in the territory of the EU. And we're talking about these robbers who want to capitalize our data. And the resources that are available, not just financial, but all other resources that are possessed by the EU are much larger than what a small country like Serbia can have. We can praise of very strong civil society, and we are proud of that fact, and not just as donor, but also as an organization that actively participates in the activities of our partners. So this type of dilemma can be resolved by continuing our work on harmonizing our regulations with the EU regulations, and by working on speeding up our accession to the EU. Another contradictoriness, I will mention just some of them, I will not list all of them, don't worry. It has been scientifically proven that people are willing to change their personal data in exchange for increasing the level of security, or even improving the perception of security. When we talk about security, we actually talk about perception. I can feel more or less safe in an environment. I have a recent example. In Karađorđev Square in Zemun, dozens of cameras have been installed there, and many neighbors are happy because people who have not stopped at the red light or at zebra crossing will be seen, and it will be possible to punish them for that. But very few are thinking about the fact that those who are operating these cameras, they know that Milosavljevic is leaving his home every morning at 10 o'clock, taking his son to school, then coming back to the parking. He is moving chaotically on the parking a lot because he forgot where he parked last night, and he is going by different buildings like the Hotel Yugoslavia, meandering to avoid the hose, and coming to Rasaska. So those who are operating these cameras and this system, they know what my daily routine is.
So they can also use it for the good and for the bad. And lately, we have been fascinated with the digital sphere and what can be done there. But I remember some 10 years ago when a big supermarket chain came to Serbia and they promoted what they had. They left their catalogs on the doorknobs during the summer season, and it was easy for you to know whether a family was at home or not because nobody took away the catalogs from the door. I don't think that those who did that had a bad intention to expose us, but it turned out that it was very easy for you to establish whether somebody was entering an apartment or not for a while, based on the catalogs that remained on the doorknobs. And we've been dealing with this topic for years, really, and not only with the topic of privacy, but also trying to view it in a triangle between private data, secret data, public data, and there's always some kind of tension. You have secrecy that has to exist. You have privacy that also has to exist, and you look for transparency, that Brankica says what she's supposed to say, and not only say, but also to do things right. So this is the triangle that we're moving along. But my impression is that we're on a moral pedestal, and that we're preaching to people how they have to look after their data. There are some colleagues who very frequently mention me when they act like gamblers towards their data. Should they be doing that? Should I offer my private data for an email service or for funny videos with cats? Is this my right? Will I sacrifice my privacy for funny cat videos? And it's easy for some things. I'm trying to give an answer to myself. I can tell my children, although they incessantly share our cats' videos on YouTube, I can tell them that they should not log in into some applications using facial recognition technology, although they're only sharing cat videos. But anybody who knows anything about democracy and the democratic order must know that privacy is the fundamental infrastructure element of each democratic society and is incorporated in an entire set of democratic rights, as Brankica has reminded us. And from that aspect, I think that we are entitled to preach to people, and I think that it's a skill to be able, in coordination with the state authorities who are those who are the closest to us, because we cannot protect ourselves without them. In cooperation with state authorities, we should be able to get a measure, the right measure, the right balance for collecting those data, for using those data. And I think that it's a constant exercise that we have to do. There are dozens of projects funded by donors, but these projects will not solve everything. We always need another project. We always need to have the civil society that is transparent, that is strong and able to do this. For example, the practice that we had regarding the draft law on internal affairs on police showed that we can balance this, and it's good that we found some good arguments in this, and that's why I'm hopeful, like we are all hopeful, that we will be able to deal with this issue in the future, regardless of some situations that will happen with the electric power industry, with the healthcare sector, but we need to have something that we will apply even in those crisis situations. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Milosavljevic. Finally, as our host, I would ask our Executive Director of Partner Serbia, Ana Toskić Cvjetinović, to address us and officially open this Privacy Week. Thank you, Nastasia. There's not much left for me to say, especially after Miodrag. We have been working together too long, and we share many of the views on this topic. We will change the order next week, but I would like to thank all of our introductory speakers for being our partners and cooperators and our support, and for being with us this year. This is the 14th Privacy Day in Serbia. The first time that we marked it was in 2010. Together with the Open Society Foundation and the Office of the Commissioner. And this is our 4th Privacy Week. Privacy Week is our attempt to switch from one day to a week and then to a year in which we will review all issues of importance for privacy. 4 years ago, we realized that we cannot address even a small segment of relevant issues within a single day. And things have been have become complicated from one year to another. And this year, the amount of time that we have will probably not be enough to tackle all the issues that we're supposed to tackle. At the beginning, you saw a video where we tried to single out the events that, in our view, marked the general issue of privacy protection in Serbia and globally, from the continuation of a dialogue on biometric surveillance through tragic events, mass shootings that resulted in serious violations of the right to personal data protection, the right to privacy, mass use of surveillance, a violation of personal data that serve as the basis for different violations of citizens' rights during the elections, and they are still being determined. And in December, we tried to make this video, and we looked at those events, and since then, some important things happened that could not be included. In December, some photographs were published from personal IDs of students who participated in protests. We also mentioned the hacking attack on the electric power industry of Serbia, where we still do not know whether some personal data of citizens have been put into jeopardy. We're still talking about a system where we do not have the tradition of the determination of responsibility and accountability for the emissions that occur. And although we're trying to be enthusiastic because of the development of the technology, additional privacy that can be given to us for different types of contents and services, this concern is still prevailing because everything that is going on is not taking into account all risks to our citizens. And we still do not have a well-developed democratic culture and strong institutions that will control this. And these risks are becoming more and more complex. And everything that people before me said shows that these conversations are not something that takes place within the legal circle or the lawyer circles. Even outside those circles, people are discussing technology, sociological effects, the effects that the technology is taking on all of us. And today, when we talk about data, personal data and privacy, my personal impression is that we're talking about power and control, about the power of corporations, institutions, political systems to control individuals, and the power that individuals and the civil sector should have and control all the data controllers. And that's why we chose this slogan for this year's conference, Choose Privacy, because not because only of the situation in Serbia, but also because of this general election year that awaits us. We still think that despite all the challenges that exist, that an individual has the right to choose, that when somebody requests a part of our personality, and this is our data, to assess whether they want to enter such a relationship and whether they can fight this and set some limitations to such interference, and whether we still have a choice in that situation, and whether this choice is something that is given to us or whether we should fight for it and try to preserve it. We mentioned some of the topics that we will deal with, the events that we were talking about have inspired us, and I will not elaborate on them because I think that we've actually gone longer than our agenda says, but we're talking in a circle of veterans in the civil sector as well as our colleagues from the private sector, from the media, from the public sector. And all those discussions are reflected in the program of the conference, and they're all part of the Privacy Week. And I would like to thank you for this. This year, we intensively collaborated with BIRN, with the OSCE, in order to define some topics, and all those that we talked to last year about the topics that we should discuss have contributed to the definition of topics that you have in front of you. And I hope that you will be here to listen to our panels. I would like to thank you all for being here and you for your participation. And I will officially open the 4th Privacy Week. Thank you, and I wish you success at this conference. Thank you, dear Anna. And as Anna said, this marks the official opening of Privacy Week. Once again, I would like to thank everybody who's here in this room with us and all those who are monitoring us online through our YouTube channel. We are inviting you all to take part in our panels, and for all online participants, you can use the comment section on YouTube for your questions and comments. I will give the floor now to Mrs. Kristina Obrenović, moderator of our first panel, Choose Privacy, the Role of Personal Data in the Global Election Year. And I wish you all good and successful work.
Dobar dan svima.
Good morning to all, actually good afternoon to all. Can we hear each other? I'm Kristina Obrenović. And on behalf of Partner Serbia, I would like to thank you once again for joining us today. All of you who are with us here and who are watching us online. And panel privacy role of personal data in the global election year. It was supported by the Metamorphosis Foundation, the organization that we've been cooperating with for a number of years now. And we work on similar topics and we share the same values. And we're opening the Privacy Week aware of the fact of the role of citizens' data in electoral processes and how frequent abuse is of this data for the purpose of influencing the electoral will. As the panelists said, in 2024, more than half of the global population will have a chance to vote in elections. In Serbia, elections were held in December, and they were accompanied, surrounded by a large number of cases of abuse and abuse of personal data. And a lot of that abuse was related to the abuse of personal data. And electoral campaigns are increasingly relying on the use of new technologies and the use of social media, and they work by processing personal data of citizens and gaining profits. The use of networks and digital tools for political purposes created new challenges when it comes to the protection of electoral rights. Cambridge Analytica case and other cases show that there is a lack of responsibility and oversight, lack of control of multinational companies and other institutions, and also the abuse of data from public databases in Serbia are frequent here. We had cases that were mentioned in the introductory panel, and data from databases of the pension fund or social security funds are abused in order to exert pressure on voters and influence their will. And during a panel, we will talk whether personal data has become a tool to win the election, and also abuse in political campaigns, regulations of the EU that were adopted or whose adoption is anticipated, which can affect us in this field, the role of information and AI, and the responsibilities of major companies, governments, and others in this field. I have panelists here in this room and online, and my panelists are Ms. Montserrat Legorreta, Program and Operations Associate from the Global Network, Angela Trajić, member of the legal team CERTA, Goran Rizanović, Program Manager for Media for Democracy of the Metamorphosis Foundation, and we have online Tijana Cvetičani, Program Director Why Not Association from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Đorđe Bojović, Western Balkans Advisor working in the European Parliament. Since our panel is late, and I hope that we will finish our panel on time, I do not want to take too much of the time, and my first question will be for Ms. Montserrat to explain us what the Global Network Initiative is doing, what their activities are, and to tell us what the role of data is in this global electoral year, in her view.
I need to wait for the translation. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I am the Program and Operations Associate at the Global Network Initiative. We are a multi-stakeholder organization that works who works mainly on freedom of expression and privacy. And the reason we're a multi-stakeholder is because we have different kinds of members within our fold. We have big technology companies, civil society, academics, and investors. And this group of people actually works together in order to further responsible company decision making. So that's the main thing that we do around the tech space through four pillars: the accountability pillar, the policy pillar, the learning, and the framework through which all of these things come together. And just very briefly, we have an assessment process that takes place every 2 or so years. We just completed the 4th assessment cycle, where we assess companies and how they comply with the GNI principles, which are based on human rights law, and their improvement over time. So that is a super important mechanism that we use in order to hold companies accountable. And the main difference is that some other spaces may be a little more adversarial, but this space is really collaborative with civil society in order to move these policies forward. So I guess that's a brief description of what we do, and happy to be here to discuss such an important electoral year for the world.
What is the role of personal data? What is your opinion?
Yes, so personal data, I think the main thing in terms of personal data and the lens through which GNI focuses on is mainly to process it in a way that is compliant with data protection laws, mainly through what we've known as the golden standard, which you've mentioned, GDPR, and also Convention 108+. Always thinking through a human rights lens, right? That's, I think, the main thing is, like, every time we think about these things, it's mainly through a human rights lens in order to basically be able to provide frameworks through which we can continue to keep people safe and for elections to continue to be free and for democratic processes to continue to occur without interference from malicious actors, whatever those may be.
Tell us just whether you think personal data is the currency to win the election.
Wow. Weather data. I think that's a complicated question. I think, unfortunately, data has become a kind of currency, but I don't think we should see it that way. I really think that we should focus on it, again, from a human rights lens, and through which companies can institute processes, and we'll talk about it further, in order to make sure that they have processes in place internally to combat nefarious actors and influence operations potentially. That's not the scope of GNI's work. We focus more on government demands for user data. But I do think that viewing data as currency is not something that, I mean, I know it's used a lot, but I would continue to think that data is, again, should be viewed through a human rights lens.
Hvala, gospođo Montserrat. Pričat ćemo malo kasnije I o odgovornosti kompanija.
Thank you, Mrs. Montserrat. We will talk about responsibility and accountability of companies later on a little bit more. And I would like to ask Mr. Bojovic, who is with us online, so you can see us and you can hear us, a question for you, bearing in mind that you work in the European Parliament. Maybe just briefly, did you monitor follow the debate in the European Parliament about the irregularities in Serbian elections? Was the abuse of personal data mentioned? And what I wanted to ask is, bearing in mind that the election for the European Parliament is scheduled for this year, also at the level of the EU, we will have elections. Does the EU have a response or preventive measures to prevent the exploitation of personal data for electoral purpose? Good afternoon to all. I hope you can hear me. Greetings to all from Brussels, from the European Parliament, where this and last week we had a debate about elections in Serbia, the state of democracy in Serbia, the abuse of data, personal data, not just personal data. We had representatives of civil society and other stakeholders that participated in the electoral process, and I believe that Most groupings are familiar with what happened on the 17th of December, and the Parliament is very carefully monitoring the electoral process and the post-electoral activities. I believe that you all know that there will be a resolution to be adopted by the Parliament in some 10 days, and probably the investigation that the European Parliament will ask for will have a role. And now we come to the issue of abuse of privacy and personal data. When it comes to the EU elections for the European Parliament will be held between June 6 and June 9 this year. And for the first time, they will be held in accordance with all the regulations adopted to secure more transparency, more accountability, more resilience of the EU, as people like to phrase it here, resilience to the interference of different focus companies, states in the electoral process. What the EU is best with is regulations. So we regulate whatever needs to be regulated. Sometimes we go even beyond and take it too far, but it also helped the EU to protect against interferences with the electoral process. Since 2020, it culminated with the US elections. So since 2020, the European Union has been trying to create a legal and regulatory framework that will contain everything for the electoral process to unfold without any abuse and smoothly, both in the EU and countries aspiring to become part of the EU. And this, I think, would be enough by way of introduction, just to touch upon the topics. And these are the three pillars what the European Union is doing when it comes to prevention, about protection, and building resilience of the EU to abuse of the electoral process from the outside, by individuals, by companies, by states, all those who are trying to do that. So this implies the regulatory framework, better transparency of platforms, and so on and so forth, and cooperation with platforms. For the first time, I would say it's tremendously important. So cooperation with the tech companies working in the field of advertising, promoting political contents, being involved, that are involved in the electoral process. And without cooperation with them, there is no implementation of the legal framework. And the third part that emerged after Brexit is disinformation. And we also have the European Democracy Action Plan 2020, Code of Practice on disinformation. So, and then also the defense package has been adopted recently. So it's a huge pile of paper whose purpose is for the companies, platforms, and all those who participate in the electoral process to have protection against what is coming. We will have a big test of that in June. You're probably monitoring the events. We have strengthening of rights in Germany. We have different campaigns aimed at destabilizing the EU from the inside. We will see whether it's a paper tiger and whether what the EU has adopted will make sense and protect it. So these are the tools that the EU has for potentially peaceful election. Thank you, Mr. Boyer. Just a short question for you. Do you think that personal data is the currency to win the elections? Absolutely. If I have to answer in one word, it's absolutely. And we can talk about details later.
Thank you. We will go back to you later. We'll talk in greater detail about regulations. And now I would like to include our second online participant, Ms. Cvjeticanin, from the Why Not organization from Bosnia and Herzegovina. This organization is also very active when we talk about information, and this is one of the first fact-checking organizations in the region. Hi, Tiana. And the first question for you. What is the role of personal data in the election process in Bosnia and Herzegovina? What can you conclude? What is dominant, the traditional misuse of personal data, or do we also now have misinformation online and that kind of misuse? Hi, Christina. Well, we see both. We see the traditional ones, but since digital technologies have been present for a long time, it's a question what is traditional. Is SMS a traditional misuse, or an email sent by somebody on whose list you have not subscribed and who should not have your information, and similar things? But we also have other situations such as the sending of traditional letters by regular mail. We had the abuse of personal data of retired persons who, ahead of the elections, of the previous elections, received a detailed letter from the president, that is from the prime minister of the federation, presenting in detail what they have done for the pensioners and how they have fought for them. This was done amid the election campaign and is an example of a traditional misuse of personal data done by somebody who has access, who should not have access to those data, abusing the office for promoting the party for the election, and that's why he was blacklisted by the U.S. State Department. Now we have some newer formats as well. There are some cases in which we can hardly see where the data came from, whether they were leaked or how they were obtained by those who participate in the election processes. In the same year, 2018, there was a large growth in the number of persons who are registered for voting from abroad by mail, and it's expressed in tens of thousands. And this occurred again in 2020, when more than 100,000 people were registered for voting abroad. Partly, this is a consequence of the fact that there's a brain drain of the population, but not that big. And somebody reported to the media that some of those people were registered abroad, but they did not really live abroad, and they voted in their polling stations in the places where they lived. And there was some pressure on the Central Electoral Commission to publish those lists and to publish who the people who are registered for voting from abroad are, because there was a massive or significant leakage of personal data for people regarding the people who were registered to vote from abroad. The Commission did this, but after the publication of those data, the Agency for Personal Data Protection requested them to be withdrawn from the webpage. And now we have a tricky situation regarding what is the protection of personal data. The protection of privacy prevails over the protection of the elections. Why do we have an agency that reacts to the publication of data but not to the misuse of data? Why don't we have the adequate reaction of law enforcement to the misuse of data? And where can we put this online dimension of misuse? At the time when this large growth of voters registered to vote abroad was registered, what we observed as a civil society organization and another organization that monitors the elections in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they observed that there was an unexpected growth of fake games of chance on the internet that requested you to take a photo of your ID card in order to get a prize and send it to some website or an address, and they provided very precise instructions telling the people to take the photographs of the front side and the back, which means that you're giving away all your personal data. This is something that we saw in 2018, and it never stopped. Every week, I think, we uncover this fake game of chance as fake information, because these games do not really exist. And nobody has determined what is going on with the personal data that those organizations receive from people. And this is still something that has not been proven, because we unfortunately have rather inert institutions, those that should investigate those suspicions. Even in this real life, in the real life cases, we do not have sufficient investigations of cases of misuse of personal data, let alone the online area. So we see both. We see the situations where it is not clear from where the data have been taken, and a huge number of issues are being raised. How to secure the privacy and the integrity of elections and the protection of personal data of voters. Thank you, Tiina. Everything that you said was very important, and I'm glad that you have shared this with our spectators. We will talk about this in the second round. What I would like to know in addition to this is to think that personal data is the currency that helps people win elections. I think that the misuse of personal data, unfortunately, can be something that is used for that purpose. If you have an honest campaign and if you do everything by the book, I don't think that things should work that way. The currency of winning the election should be your election program that you will present and the things that you will offer to citizens as a candidate. Thank you, Tiina. And now we will go back here. I will ask again my panelists who are here. First question is for Mr. Rizal from the Metamorphosis Foundation. We talked about disinformation. We mentioned them in this segment of the discussion, and I would like you to tell us something more about the role of misinformation in election processes and about the abuse of personal data related to the sharing of misinformation.
Whenever we have any kind of voting going on in Macedonia, whether it's a referendum, local elections, general elections, we face a surge of disinformation campaigns. So it has a really substantial role around elections, these disinformation campaigns, and this has been proven to be true at least in the last 2 election cycles, maybe 8 or even 10 years. Regarding data, I don't know about the situation in Serbia, but election data, specifically in Macedonia, is not available in an open data format, in a machine-readable format. You cannot download it, so journalists, civil society organizations don't have access to it. They can see the results while the votes are counted, but we cannot download the data in an open data format. On the other hand, the political parties can. They have access to this data, and they also have access to the election lists. And imagine what can be done if they cross-reference this data with data from social media, for example, from Facebook. So in this way, these disinformation campaigns can be targeted to a specific group of people that are relevant to the content of that disinformation campaign. So to answer the question directly, they play a huge role and they can have a really big impact on the election outcome.
Thank you. Thank you. We will continue later and we will deepen this topic regarding disinformation, but we have to go back to the local environment, to Serbia. We have our colleague also from CERTA, Angela Trajic. She's a member of the legal team of CERTA, and among other things, she was a monitor at the latest elections that took place in Serbia in December. So my first question, in accordance with the topic and everything that we were talking about, is how many cases of abuse of personal data were registered by CERTA during the election campaign? And please give us some examples that we haven't heard about until now. Yes, CERTA is an organization that monitors elections since 2016. And what we determined on the basis of our experience is that personal data abuse is a tool that makes it possible for political parties to gain some illegal privileges. In this election process, CERTA registered about between 600 and 700 calls of citizens reporting certain abuse, including the abuse of personal data. Some of the examples are humanitarian gifts of humanitarian character that were given to people who were known to political parties as beneficiaries of social benefits. And it's a question, how did they know about their names and their addresses? We also had cases where political parties called people and addressed them using their names, in other words, telling them that they have their personal data. They use them for different purposes in order to exert certain pressure on the voters and for other similar goals. Also, through long-term observation, we concluded that the personal data abuse also occurred in elderly homes where people used their ID cards without their agreement in order to send their requests to have those people vote from those elderly care homes. And without their consent, commissions came to those homes to take their votes. Also, we could see that in the process of collection of support of voters to electoral lists, the signatures of some people were forged in order to ensure that election lists have the required number of signatures. And finally, through the analysis of the voters list and through the analysis of the election engineering that we witnessed, we could see that many people's place of residence were changed, which resulted in the bringing of a large number of voters to Belgrade in order to change the will of Belgraders at the elections. And this happened because citizens' personal data were abused. We had a case where a gentleman reported that his mother was a victim of such a situation. She was asked whether she wanted to support the president, and she agreed. But some people from political parties took her ID card without explaining to her what this was about, and they changed her place of residence and brought back the ID card. It's a question whether she was aware at all that her place of residence was changed and that she went on that date to some other place rather than the place where she was supposed to cast the ballot. Thank you, Angela, for this. I would like us to talk about whether some proceedings have been initiated and whether we have some epilogues for those situations in the second part of our discussion. But now I would again ask Ms. Montserrat. What is the role of big platforms and have they become the key actors, key players? We've agreed that we're going to talk about the responsibility of big tech and big companies from the angle of your organization.
So I would like to take a step back to what my colleagues have just mentioned on basically methods through which personal data is being used to manipulate elections in traditional forms. I think that Steven Feldstein has this book on the rise on digital repression, and his argument is that the mechanisms and tactics are not new, which is something that is being mentioned. What changes is the speed and the amount of data that exists. That's the key here. And I encourage you to read his book. He goes through a lot of how these methods are being used by authoritarian states, some illiberal democracies, not all authoritarian, in order to kind of use technology and the mechanisms they use. So with that in mind, then we can go back to kind of like the platform, because I will say electoral lists should not be shared like that. I think we know that as a general principle and just generally in terms of data protection. The thing here is that, and if we go back to the rise of social media, where it was meant to be this democratic platform, if you go back to 2010s where people were very excited about what social media could do to bring about a democracy and encourage information sharing and civil society to continue to participate in discourse. What people didn't predict, or people could say some did, is how this could also be used as a tool to repress and collect more information, right? And so now to answer your question on responsibility and transparency, it's important to note that platforms do have a responsibility to uphold human rights. I think that's mainly enshrined through the UNGPs, which are principles that guide responsible company decision making. And so the Global Network Initiative was created with that in mind, in order to help keep people and users of these technologies safe. And so what this means is to oscillate the fine line between, and some of my colleagues have already mentioned it, with transparency and accountability, right? It's important to note that, even if, depends who asks for the information. If the government is asking for the information, what purpose do they want this information for? And colleagues have mentioned now, what happens if you have the electoral list and you cross-reference it against social media information, right? And so transparency reports, and companies are doing this now. They're creating different types of transparency reports. So you'll be able to see some companies like Meta has a good transparency center. You can look at different types of transparency reports. Amongst them, in the case of Serbia, for example, they have the quarterly adversarial reports. And in quarter 4 of 2022, thanks to actually Burns investigations, they were able to kind of pinpoint a disinformation campaign. And this is also to note the role that civil society has to influence companies as well. This is even, you can go in, it's public, you can go and say this is how they also were able to catch these actors that were basically running a campaign in favor of certain political parties within Serbia. So the Global Network Initiative has been doing some of these reports since 2010. Google's first report went public in 2010. And the question here is how companies continue to create these transparency centers and continue to be accountable, while also keeping in mind that regulators also need to understand how the technology works and how and what it takes within the company, and the fact that you can't make all information public, because this is people's, like, again, going back to the point of personal data, this is data that belongs to people, and there's this fine line to navigate between, you know, showing what big tech companies are doing, specifically with elections, which I think, like, you know, big companies have learned and evolved, and as technology has gotten faster. And that's like a big part of what certain regulations, such as the DSA, are bringing on, and why the GNI is actually evolving its assessment process as well to bring forth its experience and be able to continue to create something that makes regulators and people feel like companies are in fact being accountable. Our assessment process is voluntary, and now, like, with the DSA, a lot of these things are going to be more compulsory in nature. So that's, I think, that's one of the ways that transparency, accountability ties into the question of privacy as well.
Thank you, Ms. Monserrat. The transparency of data processing is one of the key factors and something that we frequently lack, regardless of who the data controller is, or processor is. You mentioned TSA, and I would now like to ask Mr. George. I just have to check whether he's still with us online. Can we hear him and see him? I can hear you and see you. I don't know if you can see me and hear me. Yes. Following up on what Ms. Monserrat was talking about, I would like us to talk more about the DSA and other regulations that have been adopted or are to be adopted and that can affect this area. There are some umbrella regulations, and if these were laws, we would call them bylaws, like code of conduct. They have different names, but the essence is the same. GDPR regulates data protection, and Digital Service Act also does that. It came after 2018, and they set the legal framework and the enforcement framework for everything that is being done later in all other documents. Recognizing that elections should be better than the referendum, for example, like the UK referendum or Brexit referendum, where it was recognized that by targeting certain groups or individuals, there was a big influence on the outcome of elections. And recognizing this, the EU in 2012 adopted the European Democracy Action Plan. It deepens certain things that pertain to transparency, openness, and other things that pertain to elections, but ESA and GDPR still remain the essence, like enforcement tools. Well, I don't know the exact wording in Serbian, but these are the tools for the enforcement of what is envisaged by other means. And then we have conduct for disinformation, and in December, a month and a half ago, Defense of Democracy package was adopted a month and a half ago. It's a bit more controversial. Why? Because it envisages one step further, where organizations, individuals, all those who have political advertising or participate in election process in one way or another, that deal with social issues and policies, and that take money from a third state, have to make it public. What is slippery slope in this case is that Brussels is primarily thinking about China, Russia, those countries that are said to have a malignant influence on democracy. But then we come to the cases such as Dodik here in the region, or somebody in Georgia, want a foreign agents law. And this is the thin line that has not been resolved in the best way possible. In a wish to achieve transparency, to see where money is coming from, to whom, and with what intentions, we can actually come into a situation that somebody who wants to make an influence will come and say European Union has adopted paper A, and say I want to have paper B. So this was a slippery slope regarding the legal regulation of the best way to shape this. But what remains is that 81% of Europeans believe that foreign influence in our system is a major problem, and on the basis of that, the Transparency Register was adopted. There is access to information of public importance, to key information that represent activities that are publicly available and pertain to elections, and also records regarding third parties that invest in elections after elections. So while the European Parliament is working, we can now, for elections that were held in 2021, 2022. For example, there's an interesting example of Slovakia. You remember the front page of Informer, Ukraine attacks Russia. So Slovakia is not too far from that. They had the electoral process. They have a huge problem with the Russian narrative in the country. And it's a question how a country that will have presidential elections in March or April can protect the democratic process and the democratic system in an EU member state. This is what is on paper and what the EU has envisaged. What is the problem for us is how to use this framework and make it applicable on the Western Balkans, on Serbia, on Bosnia, on all ex-Yugoslav republics, how to make it a benchmark for something that we want to have here in order to regulate our digital Wild West.
And there we come to something that has risen as a potential solution in the past year or two, and I will conclude with that and maybe leave some space for later, and that's the possibility of membership of the Western Balkans in the digital market of the European Union. This is the only way for this entire package that has 3,000 pages and a number of enforcement methods that has been enforced for 6 or 7 years in different elements to become legally binding for the Western Balkan 6. That's the essence. There is no other way, because what we have and what we always hear when it comes to European integration, gradual harmonization, the legal framework of the Western Balkan countries with the EU norm and so on and so forth. But until we arrive at that point, there will be many processes and elections. So what we need to work on is for these positive practices and tools that the EU has available to become the golden standard for us. And the only way to do that is for the Western Balkan 6 to come and say, A, we want that, and B, to take part of the cake, part of the pie, and say, we like this segment of the market that has a little bit more chocolate and sour cherries, because we like it more. It's not so controversial, and you can let the Western Balkans be part of that. We can. This is the only way to be under a bigger umbrella and protected. And let's not fool ourselves and think that the Western Balkan countries have the resources and or the will to do that on their own, to apply this to platform or whoever. In my view, this is the only way to become resilient and to keep pace with the EU. And the point is to say to Europe, this is important for you as well. Thank you, Mr. Bojovic. The implementation of these regulations is something that potentially worries us in the Western Balkans. Not only whether there will be implementation, but what kind of implementation we may have. And that's why I would like to ask Tiana. Tiana, can you see us? Just to get the confirmation that Tiana can hear us and see us. Yes, we can hear each other and see each other. Great. We've opened up the topic of the implementation of EU regulations in the region. What is your take on this? Well, what is your view? Tell us a bit more about that. When we talk about the protection of data and influence on elections, one of the problems that we see in the region is the very low level of information literacy, which is combined with inertia on the part of the institution in the prosecution of the violations of these rights. So that's why we have a situation where something does not have to be a fraud. Miodrag mentioned a good example with these leaflets on doorknobs. You will see that people leave their personal data on different web pages, ordering stuff or doing some other things. So you just go to that web page and pick thousands of pieces of personal data of people who are not aware of offering them. So we need to have a more secure digital environment, and the implementation of these digital regulations and is necessary. We need co-regulation and self-regulation as well. And in the past several years, we've been quite active on advocacy for more secure digital information, starting with what is focused for us. This is disinformation. There is a cost of practice against disinformation, and major platforms undertook to provide more information and be more transparent and have some functional, meaningful cooperation with fact-checking organizations in order to not only reduce the amount of information in their platforms, but to create a disabling environment and to have something that is called duty of care. It is something where you try to preempt problems rather than dealing with problems when it arises. That's the case with information, disinformation, data security. These are the things that we do not have regulated in the region. We don't have a functional framework that provides this type of security online, and this is also reflected on the security of personal data. When we hear how many public institutions were hacked in different countries in the region and what was done with this data stolen from these institutions, it is a big question mark. Let's not go there. But just to mention that, and these are not all just ransom attacks. Some can also lead to another instance of undermining the electoral process. So this security online and offline has to exist, and it has to be part of the electoral process. We see certain risks, unfortunately, there, because we have institutions that do not react to even documented irregularities. For example, we have this very recent case with what CERTA presented to the public authorities in Serbia. So we have to look at the regulations that are created now in the EU, but if the system does not operate in the inside, that will not affect the integrity of the electoral process, not contribute to greater integrity of the process. Thank you, Tiana. Following up on what Georgia said, is a regional approach a solution to this? I think yes, because we have strong linkage in the regions and strong links, particularly among countries that speak the same language, particularly about this voters registered in abroad to vote, and most of them come from Serbia and Croatia, and so this abuse went into two directions, not just for abuse of electoral processes in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but what we see in Serbia as well. So it's particularly sensitive. In certain areas like Srebrenica, it was registered at a very high level. So the region as such, on the other hand, is very much invisible in the eyes of major tech companies. None of the countries here is an important market in itself and does not have a strong negotiating position if you are asking the companies to be more responsible, to secure a better balance between transparency and security. It's very difficult to negotiate them when you come from a very small country that is not present and not visible in their radar. And our argument here is that the EU should have an important role there, but the region has to act as one as much as possible, and the civil society should have an important role there, as it has had. It was driving this process so far, and to talk with the big platforms, I don't think that any other way is feasible. Thank you, Tina. We are going back to our space, and I will ask Mr. Rizal a question that follows up on this. In addition to the role of the civil sector and the regional approach, how else can we fight disinformation and everything else that we discussed? And what are the key players here, and what is the approach of your organization?
To answer, I wanted to talk about an example from Macedonia that happened. The colleagues reminded me that happened 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. In 2013, we had local elections, and the government then, Nikola Gruevski's government wasn't sure that they will win in the municipality of Centar. That's the center of the city of Skopje. And what they did, they printed IDs to Macedonian minority members from Albania, from Prespa region. That's the southwestern part of the country, and they had printed IDs, and they voted in the municipality of Centar. Like 50 or 60 of them were on the same address, in the same apartment. So we've seen this 10 years ago. But luckily enough, they didn't win the election. So 3 times the citizens of this municipality had to re-vote again and again. And all the 3 times, the difference between the person that won on the first vote increased more. So people were determined to go out and vote. But unfortunately, this led to institutions trying to figure out how to clean the election list. And they were trying to do this for years, and we believe that it's still not cleaned well enough, so there still might be some of these people from other countries that are still having their IDs printed back then. And last local elections, in 2021, we voted with the fingerprint machines. So we had to leave our fingerprints in order to vote in the elections. And this was, I don't know if there are other examples of people that had to vote with fingerprints machines in Europe recently. I'm not certain, but this was really discouraging for people because you had to wait. There was a big line, so people weren't encouraged to go out and vote. And I'm afraid the same thing will happen this year on the elections that we are having presidential and parliamentary elections in May. So this is one thing that I wanted to mention. About the main actors and what should be done. The main actors are the people that have executive power. So first of all, I believe that transparency should be increased. So the transparency of the institutions and the freedom of speech, the freedom of the media to freely, cover all the things regarding the elections. This is one thing that is crucial for me. And also another thing that I would like to mention is the quality of the communication between the government officials and the public, the audience. So this has to be with high quality as a response to disinformation campaigns. Yeah.
Thank you. We wish you elections that will proceed in a fair atmosphere, democratic elections, free elections, but we will definitely follow what's going on. We have very little time, but we will extend the time for our panel by some 10 minutes so the audience has the chance to ask questions. And before that, just one question for Angela. We mentioned that at the beginning, but just to go briefly back to that, has CERTA instituted certain proceedings in relation to these irregularities? Were there any actors instituted? Is there any responsive institutions? In this election process, we have not instituted procedure before the commissioner because we concluded that the abuse was such that these could be criminal offenses. CERTA has filed 4 criminal charges so far to the relevant prosecutor's office, and these criminal reports or criminal charges for the criminal offense of unauthorized collection of personal data, forging the public document, and abuse of office. I think these are the offenses. 4 citizens of Serbia with their residence in Novi Sad and Belgrade, 3 in Novi Sad, and 1 in Belgrade, last year went to the conference in Banja Luka. And that's why they filed a request to vote abroad, and they provided their personal data for the purposes of that vote. But when they reviewed the electoral list, they realized that they were registered for voting from abroad also this year. And the key thing is that all these 4 persons were in the same conference in Banja Luka, and they concluded that somebody, instead of them, generated this data and filed applications for voting from abroad this year as well. They had a chance to see these applications, and they confirmed that these signatures are not theirs. So based on these reports, CERTA filed criminal charges against unknown perpetrators employed in the consular office in Banja Luka and employees of the Ministry of Public Administration, Local Self-Government. There is still no response, but it has been recently done. I'm now opening the possibility for our audience here in the room to ask questions if they have questions. If we have no questions, I'll give an opportunity to all panelists to share their final remarks, or maybe say something that they didn't have a chance to say. I will start with Montserrat. Just 2 minutes, and just briefly your final remarks.
Yeah, I think a big point that has been made is that traditional mechanisms continue to be used in order to sway elections in a non-transparent way, and the magnitude of this has been exponentiated with technology, and I think that's important to just keep at the forefront. One of the big things that I work on at the Global Network Initiative is collaborating with civil society organizations, specifically because we are a multi-stakeholder. And so in terms of transparency and reaching out to big tech companies, we understand that sometimes it's a very big challenge. So we are developing materials and continuing to be a part of projects that help open these doors through members in different regions. And I think that that's a big part and complementary to the work that we do, and a way to engage and talk with big tech platforms, because they don't operate in silos. I think it's a question of also stakeholder fatigue, and providing mechanisms through which to open these lines of communication.
Thank you. I would like to give the floor to George, if he can hear us. Yes, I can hear you. Just final remarks, very briefly. Maybe something you didn't have time to say and you believe is important to be mentioned. I think we have covered, actually scratched the surface of what is going on at the European level, and what is something that should be adopted in our country, and I think this is important. And Tiana and I have been repeating that. But 2024, because of the context of the Serbian election and the European election and everything that is going globally, it can be a political boost to implement what we are advocating for, and so to implement that in the Western Balkans. That is the membership of the Western Balkans 6 in the digital market of the EU. So I would like to thank Anna and partner Serbia. They're doing a fantastic job, and it will be one of the springboards for this campaign to gain momentum and to find allies in all Western Balkan countries, so that we can move this forward and get the framework that we presented here in Brussels, where there are people, really people who want to hear that and implement that. Thanks a lot. Tiana, can you hear us? Would you like to say something in conclusion? I would like to follow up on what Georgia said. I would like to say that the same applies to the implementation of DSA, DMA Code of Practice against disinformation. This is something that should be that should strongly improve the framework that we are working in. And what is important to mention is that it has to be a multi-stakeholder approach. So civil society experts should be involved in this. There is a lot of expertise in civil society, academic institutions, and other stakeholders that are not necessarily from the public institutions. So we have to have checks and balances mechanism where there are possibilities for abuse, and these mechanisms should secure the right safeguards without endangering freedom of expression, freedom of information, or undermining privacy or integrity of personal data. We have to take this twice when it comes to electoral processes. I would like to thank Georgia and Tiana. Despite the fact that they were not able to join us physically here, they opted for their online presence, and thus they enriched our discussion. I would like to give the floor to Goran and then Angela to conclude.
note, we didn't get the chance to mention AI-generated content and disinformation. And I think this will be a really big threat. It already is, and it will become an even bigger threat in the coming months, in the rest of the year, let's say. Specifically, audio-generated AI. So this is something that has been used before in Slovakia, somebody mentioned, and 2 audio-generated recordings, let's say, were published during the moratorium before the elections, 2 days before the elections. And now yesterday, another audio, AI-generated audio was released in the US, in New Hampshire. And this is something that I believe is a big threat, and it would be a really big challenge for us in the Western Balkan countries in the coming months.
Yes, we will talk about AI in other panels. I think that it will be mentioned in multiple panels during during our Privacy Week, especially on Friday, on the last day of our Privacy Week, but I'm glad that we had the chance at least to mention it. Angela, for the end. I would like to say regarding the elections that we witnessed, to stress that the abuse of personal data affected the outcome of the elections, and we saw massive cases of abuse during the election cycle, and our monitoring. We cannot say exactly how it affected results, but I think that institutions will have to react to those cases of abuse in order to ensure better conditions for the local elections in some places which are approaching. And this is the end of our panel. I will now give the floor to Nastasia. Dear panelists, dear Christina, thank you. Now we will have a short break that will last until 1:30, which is when our second panel, the Price of Privacy, will begin.
Dobrodošli nazad.
Welcome back. For those of you who have just joined us, welcome to the first day of our Privacy Week. We're inviting you to take an active part in our panels, and for those of you who are monitoring us through YouTube, you can ask your questions or post your comments on live chat. During this segment or this part, which will be moderated by Dragan Žarković-Obradović, Director of BIRN, we will talk about the price of privacy. Our panelists will be Tanja Maksić, Coordinator of Projects in BIRN, Dr. Aleksandar Krstić, Associate Professor, Petar Jeremić, Manager for Ethics, Wireless Media Group, Bogdan Banjac, Advisor, Service of the Commissioner for the Protection of Equality. Dragan, the floor is yours. Good afternoon and welcome to all of you and our dear colleagues who have joined us on this discussion on privacy and the media. Those of you who know the situation here in Serbia know that there's a lot of reason for holding debates such as this one. If you look at the media front pages especially, tell us to what extent brutal and intrusive reporting has been normalized, the reporting that violates the privacy of people, going as far as publishing the autopsy report of babies that died as a result of violence during childbirth. And we're here to talk about what we can do and what media should do themselves in order to improve some reporting standards, in order to internalize the code of conduct in the media community. There are clear rules telling us what media should do and how to protect privacy, and the direct cause for this panel is a report which our colleagues from BIRN did on a sample from reporting last year. I should not remind you that last year was extremely dramatic. We had 2 mass murders in May, which shifted the limits or thresholds in media reporting. We will talk about this, and we will talk also about what unfortunately became normalized in media practice, and this is invasion of privacy. The author of the report is my colleague Tanja Maksić. She and her team analyzed the reporting of 7 online media. The report will be published today, and you will find in it more details. This focuses on online media, primarily because of the speed of information, of the fact that the internet is becoming the dominant form of information, and because the consequences of violation of privacy on online media remain longer than in any other media. And that's why we focus on online media, particularly online media that create public opinion. Mostly Tanja and her team went through, I think, more than 2,000 media reports that were included in the sample. These were 2 weeks during April and September. And in May also, the period of the most intensive reporting after the mass shooting and murder in Vladislav Ribnikar Primary School and Dubona and Orašje. 2,000 were read and 400 were included where the most drastic case of violation of privacy were found. And before we move to the main results and findings of the report, I would like to know how strenuous and emotionally intensive was it to go through those 2,000 samples. Thank you all from me, and I'm glad to see you here, and I'm glad to have people online following us. And let me answer this report is one of the bad ones. You have to read 100, 200 or more reports which are very emotional, contain emotional phrases and pictures that are used to present this. And at one point, you have a hard time psychologically, and you tell yourself, I have to move back, and then I will start reading them again. As Dragana said during the introduction, we found slightly less than 3 weeks of our sample, and within those weeks we found more than 400 texts in which the media violated, without any doubt, the right to privacy, primarily when it comes to murders that happened in May, and kind of regularity that we observed in media that have online production, and the more that they have this video production, the more they violate the right to privacy. I will remind you of some examples from September that, for example, at that time, there were trials against the Beliveau clan and the criminal clan, and the trial between Milena Radulovic, an actress, against her acting teacher. Also, there were numerous cases of missing persons. There was a murder of a girl in one town, and they caused numerous cases of violation of privacy. We saw that these violations started in headlines. In half of the text that we analyzed, private data were contained in the headlines. And when you add to this the words that increase this emotional impression, this monstrosity, bloodbath, etc., you can understand what kind of text you're dealing with. Name and family name, these are the personal data that appear most frequently, so the revelation of identity of the victim or the perpetrator start with the revelation of the name and family name. And there are also other data that you can find in media reports, for example, somebody's address, the mental state of the perpetrator, previous crimes, etc. Also, the manipulation with health care data that are regarded as especially sensitive, they are the target of biggest speculations when they're reporting about perpetrators. And it turned out later, through the work of the institutions, that the majority of those data were in a simple figment of somebody's imagination, and they were denied. There were some changes in editorial policies, and we realized that minors are one of the groups that are the target of grossest violations in reporting. For example, the visual identification of juvenile victims, we found it in 55 cases. Out of that, 40 in connection with victims of the murders, mass murders in the Ribnikar Primary School and Dubona and Malorošje. As for the rights, the grossest violations of rights are done to perpetrators who have the capacity of a suspect, and we detected 133 of such cases. Out of that, 86 in connection with the mass shootings around Mladenovac. Also, for nearly 1/3 of texts, we could not find the author of the reports. We could not find the authors of photographs. In a large number of reports, we could not see who the source was. They did not even say, anonymous sources say, they did not mention any sources at all. Media also shared text among themselves, and this is one of the legitimate tactics in the digital environment in order to increase the number of visits to websites. But the trouble is that by sharing those texts, by not checking the texts that come from other media, additionally, you have more frequent violations of the right to privacy, and those violations only increase in number. Identification of victims and suspects are actually supported by data from social media. 1/3 of all photographs that were used for media reports were taken from social media. And another trend regarding this identification is something that was observed in the previous research on which this relied. This was this quasi-anonymization. For example, they blur minor victims' eyes or put a black strip in front of the eyes while keeping everything else as it is. And plus, they also mention the address, the photo of the house, etc., etc. So there's practically no anonymization. And there were some cases for which we were unsure whether they were a gross violation of victims' rights. And this concerns the publication of details regarding court proceedings. The case of Milena Radunović, the actress, was particularly striking. The trial was open to the public, and she addressed the public before that, but the media conveyed detailed questions and answers from the proceedings, so we were unsure whether the judiciary gave so to say, the permission to do this. You mentioned that this report followed up on the previous reports. So can you tell us briefly if the trends are the same or not, and if there are any changes? We are really grateful to partner Serbia and Jelena Gerd, who provided us with methodology for this and the previous report, because this provided us with solid sample. The sample was not the same, but what we could see is that we still have the same average in violations, which tells us that there's no progress, and that the recipe for those violations is always the same. The only thing that we could observe is that in the previous report, the colleagues noted that media somehow protected the suspects more than the victims. Now the situation is completely different, but we are where we are. Meaning that this report shows, if I understand you correctly, that the rights of the defendants are observed the least. So once you become a defendant, you lose the right to privacy. That's right. And just one sentence more. Something that you can see in our report and the previous reports, we lay the stress on minors and some vulnerable groups. But these groups are those that should be specially protected, and their rights are incorporated in the media laws, and they actually are affected by the system the most. That's right. In the previous report, the focus was on especially vulnerable groups, and colleague Bogdan Bajac is here from the Office of the Commissioner for the Protection of Equality. You do not actually you do publish some reports and statements on everything that you observe in practice. So does this match what you can observe in practice? Good afternoon. Yes, we did issue a report that in 2022 that referred to hate speech in the media. And on that occasion, we analyzed a large number of reports on that topic, and our findings told us that the situation was deteriorating in that area. Cases that we face, as you know, probably, in those cases, we cannot initiate proceedings ex officio. Somebody has to file a complaint, or we can for example, issue a statement for the public. In the past 2 years, we have more or less the same trend. Some 4% of complaints refer to those issues, from sensationalism, sexism in the media, aggressive communication, to the worst forms such as hate speech. I can tell you about a case of a newspaper. Just let me be precise what the headline was. This concerned a sweetener in a juice that is imported from Albania. And the headline was, Albanians poison our children and they sell us the juice that causes cancer in our children. And when you enter the text, you do not know whether it has anything to do with the headline or with the juice, for that matter. Yes, the thing was that the concentration of the sweetener was not exactly mentioned on the packaging. So this was a case that we had recently and that I can mention. You opened a large number of topics about which we could say a lot. When we're talking about our warnings to the public, we provided warnings in the cases where we thought that there were flagrant violations occurred. In the case of Milena Radulovic, the actress, we warned a TV station where they analyzed her and the perpetrator's horoscope signs. And they revealed certain data that served the purpose of determining the horoscope sign. And this concerned serious relativization of a major social issue. So we use this mechanism of warning of the public, which we cannot use too often because it would make no sense. If we reacted in that way to any violation that we observe in the media or in the public, it would happen on a daily basis. That's right. And it would no longer make sense. You said that you observed the stagnation of this trend. In the recent years, there's no improvement, or somebody might say there's no deterioration, but still I prefer to look at the improvements. What does this tell us about the system of privacy protection? We can talk about other rights as well, but here we have privacy in our focus. I don't think that the situation is not much better in other areas. Our colleagues from Partner Serbia relatively recently made a study on how courts decide on privacy violation cases, and the fact is that those cases last between 3 and 6 years, depending on whether they end with the first instance or in the first instance or the second instance, and mostly with fines. So how motivating this is for people to start with those proceedings?
Well, the title of this panel is The Price of Privacy, and we can say that the price of privacy is still lower than the profits that certain clicks can bring to the media. So the situation is as it is, and we have such experience. But still, I prefer to look at the improvements. What does this tell us about the system of privacy protection? Well, the title of this panel is The Price of Privacy, and we can say that the price of privacy is still lower than the profits that certain clicks can bring to the media. So the situation is as it is, and we have such experience. For example, you have a title, a headline over the entire page. The procedure is carried out, discrimination is established, and then they publish just a small article. Sometimes it all doesn't seem to pay off, and in order to educate the public and to act preventively, we need to do something. I want to mention this information that is related to the social media. I think it was in the report for 2022. The ratio between content marked as harmful and the amount that was removed, the amount of content that was removed. So for some social media channels, it was 50% after a longish period of time. So if these big companies that have huge resources, if they are so slow with all their resources, then what's then left for our institution, which is a small institution with limited resources? So it's necessary for all the stakeholders to understand the seriousness of the situation and their roles, and the Press Council is an important partner there. It's important to educate and to train journalists and the general public about media literacy, and so that we can have a joint approach to suppressing this negative phenomenon. Talking about Sisyphus, we have a colleague, Petrovic, Yaremitsuri, and he's an ethical standard manager from the Vares Media Group. So the Daily Courier is in our sample, and it's not the best, not the worst, and it's maybe the best paradigm when we take a look at all the segments and all parameters. It's somewhere in the middle. So, Peter, what was the headline that you wanted to fire people for last year as an ethical standard manager? Is there? We have that every day. And I live on the 10th floor. I don't have suicidal thoughts, but if people find me at the bottom of my building in the ground floor, then it's quite clear what will happen. When you mentioned Sisyphus, and people asked me, and I know many people, I used to work in Courier, people are aware of the problem, even if after the ownership transformation. And they were asking how to do that, and we said, and I said optimistically, well, we can carry out training for 3 or 4 months, and we're done. And then they said, well, we can do that, but then our audience will no longer be our audience, will become worse than Dana's. So we have to move step by step and to educate the audience. So this first reaction of the audience, we were starting to black out the names of those who were accused. Then we had reactions. Why didn't you publish the names? We want to judge them. And then you can see what kind of environment we have that we have to work in. And so when you mentioned Sisyphus, and you said we are in the middle, if you take Courier in 2017 and 2019 and today, you will see a difference. Of course, there is always a possibility for a mistake, and I avoid reading that before sleeping because I would. So depending on the event, there is 400 or 500 titles or headlines, and And we also have Mondo and Espresso with a lot of content. Some content is produced by us, some by others. You know how the market works. Everybody's taking from everyone. And I noticed that there are more mistakes when we take over some content than what we produce. So once you start working on this, you have to get to know the system. So as for the headlines, we have a team of people, and our correspondents, for example, they are working by default, and things are taken over from them, and quite often mistakes happen. There are editors when you have editors that are in a very difficult position. For example, there was a title of Dusan, title about the murder of Dusan Masic, the lawyer. And the editor almost got a heart attack. So it was on the internet maybe for less than a minute, but Biden, the editor, noticed that and tried to control the damage, but the damage was done. It was withdrawn after a minute, but it was stayed in the cache. And so we have to bear in mind that we have we can inflict damage on purpose or without a purpose. You remember this murder of this folk singer 8 years ago, and the child is mentioned, and the damage is immeasurable. We can remove that content, but the damage is done. So a lot of damage that has been done, and however, as a society, we have reached a certain level, and we have journalists that have matured as professionals, and these boundaries were moved, and now it's difficult to explain that something cannot be done. I don't think it's like Sisyphus rolling the stone, but there are results that show that we are now not at the top. And for example, on the fake news tracer, we are not in the first 15 and we used to be. So, but mistakes will happen. It's inevitable. And I would like to know about many more things, but I would like to leave some time for colleagues for their questions. We have relatively little time, and it's passing quickly. So when Peter mentioned consequences, I think that's very important. This awareness of consequences that should exist, and which each journalist should have. That's important. When we talk about privacy, and it is a trend that has been observed because of this huge amount of personal data on the internet, this situation has practically been normalized, this violation of privacy. Somehow it's considered to be at the bottom of this list. And the person whose information is published, that person loses the control of that information, loses control of the way in which of its reach. So what are the consequences? It's important to mention that this right to privacy that we are mentioning today, and the price of privacy is one of the key indicators that we look at when we talk about professionalism in the media and journalistic professionalism. So when you're violating this right, you're undermining the quality and the reputation of the profession. And we are talking about these things that persist, and we don't see progress and moving forward. And I would divide that into three things. Generally, there is the lack of will on the part of journalists to abide by the code of ethics. It's simply ignored. We can go back in the past in the communist countries when the adoption of these codes started. We had some surveys 5 or 6 years later, and only then it was registered that some awareness was starting to be built about the existence of the code and the need to respect it. So this is at a very low level, and the code will not have the essential value if there is no will to comply with it. And the Press Council and Goce Novakovic have this important role there to suggest that and to remind people of that. And another thing is this digital environment. Peter is talking about taking off the content. Recently there were protests against a YouTube channel that was violating all the principles of the journalistic profession, not just violating the right to press. So in this digital environment, you have a spiral of violence, and everything is there, everything remains there. A child that was raped and was named in the media, they will be able to find their names some 20 years later. And I have some data from Australia and America that I extracted. What is the price of privacy? In 2006, they asked the victims of crimes how they respond to trauma 5 or 6 months after the coverage of that. They gave them articles from the prison. 48% were re-traumatized, and the reactions were more negative and more traumatic when they were reading news about them that is not accurate. So this fake news, when you read fake news about yourself, you are re-traumatized. There is always this contradiction. On the one hand, with the publication, you want to help victims of certain trauma and restore their social role, but on the other hand, you step into this trap of re-traumatization. In Australia, there was a big massacre in 1996 in Port Arthur, and 3 years later there was a survey, and these victims and families, they said that they were rereading these articles in 1996, and they said that they had depression, PTSD, flashbacks, trauma, again, many psychological problems. And they particularly said that they have discussed with respect to this incessant repetition by journalists of that violence. So you have when you print something, it's in the archives and you can search for it, but what is in the digital era is particularly dangerous. And I would like to mention 2 criteria about crimes chronicles, and we know that people read it the most. And the criteria first is the most serious, greatest crime, and the sensitivity of victim. The more blood there is, and the more sensitive and vulnerable the victim is, this clickability is higher. So there is correlation established by academic research that confirms that. And I have to mention the issue of headlines. This is very often the first and the only contact of the reader with the text. And if I see in the title "killed, slaughtered, raped," that's clickable, that brings more money, and that's the situation that is very indicative, telling us that the right to privacy has to be protected in absolute terms. Particularly when it comes to minors, when it comes to public figures, celebrities, that they have a different treatment. But I'm trying to say that we can have 1,000 ethics managers, but if we don't have awareness among the journalists, when you get the information that leaked from the prosecutor's office or judges or the police, you as an editor can say, I will not publish that, or a journalist, I will not deal with that. And also another thing about these mass shootings in our country, yes, journalists were faced with this for the first time, and they wanted to be as quick as possible in reporting and covering this. They were receiving information and sending it out, but those who have an important role there are police, the court, and politicians who had to assume a responsibility for the production of accurate information and say, okay, colleague journalists, just stop there, this is not true. You remember when people came, when somebody from the police came showing the list of killings, planned killings. And yes, this privacy price is huge, and the privacy is something where you can make a lot of profit. And one of the things that was horrible for me, I remember it from the report, in most of the cases, these are people who became the subject of interest of the media by a combination of circumstances. So we are not talking about people who are public figures or holders of public offices. Of course, their privacy is violated, and we can talk about that as well. We had such cases last year, the Mikitic case, the Gilos case. But what is particularly dramatic is related to the cases of people who have been abused by the media for this hyperproduction of content.
Absolutely. I would just add another sentence, the issue of femicide, which is extremely present here. And here we have journalists who report on those cases. Always, when a woman is killed, in the headline and later in the text, you always have the description of her social situation, and there's always an indication that she's guilty because she was killed. In smaller towns or villages, you have the identification of her address, and there always has to be given some kind of justification of this violation of privacy. And this is not done only by tabloids, this is done by other media as well. That's true, yes? In connection with the fact that somebody is a public figure and should endure greater pressure of the public, there was a case of a singer, they should endure bigger public pressure. But when somebody is dissecting somebody's private life, in cases of violence, we have to think about how this affects somebody who is a victim of violence but is not a public figure, and how she will or he will react to the fact that they will have to report this someday. Peter, does this kind of debate or thoughts about what is being done is a part of your working environment? Well, let me clarify what my job is. My role is, so to say, quality control. Somebody pays me to criticize and to say why something is bad and to provide advice on how to deal with it. And the editors are those who decide what will be published or not. And this is in accordance with some standards of my and similar offices. And that's why we named my position manager, because it to make it actually evident that I am not an editor. And the editors cannot affect my decision. They cannot say you're not right. If I say that something is wrong, they will have to take it into account. When I know what was not published, this might not be visible to you once you enter the websites. I should say that this position has a purpose. And when we're talking about Ribnikar, there were a couple of things that were done wrongly, but we never published the name of a single person before a mother came and provided her testimony to us and to Nedeljnik, and before we had a text on all of victims when the lawyers asked us to, and we had a problem because one of the mothers did not give her consent to this. Although the text observed all the standards, but the lawyers deceived us and told us that we had the consent of all the victims. We never published the names of the victims or the photographs of the victims, although I think that they should be published. We never published the name or initials of the boy or his parents or where they work, what they're doing, because this all can potentially lead to, God forbid, retaliation against his sister, against the other parts of the family. There were some omissions, but we tried to correct them. Sorry for interrupting you, but I think that, generally speaking, the entire media community made an omission. Yes, but I was thinking about this later. We never provided any information that might indicate somebody's identity. But in the era of social media, does this make any sense? And in that case, we appear not to have information that we have. I found out yesterday that Belgian Le Soir, 2 or 3 days later, had an interview with the schoolmates of the boy who shot the other kids. We will later have a workshop with journalists and editors regarding those thin lines that made people think whether this is wrong or not because of the specific situations. And what you mentioned now, that at some point all the information was already made public, and in that situation, does it make sense to pay attention to those things? And let us give a suggestion. We know from the media community that the Code of Ethics will be amended this year. It's clear that editors are deciding on things that represent the violation of numerous violations of the Code of Ethics, and they are not a result of not knowing. This is a great cue. Sorry for interrupting you. It's not just not knowing. It's just a simple matter of inertia. It took us a lot to change that when some extreme hooligans that support the Dynamo soccer club do something to change the headlines into not saying Croatians did that. Because media cannot report on what the public is interested in knowing, but only about the things that are in the public interest to know. If the media could report on what is going on in somebody's bedroom, a lot of people probably would not refuse that possibility, but we have to be aware of the difference between those two concepts. Just one question for the end, and then I would like to open the floor to our colleagues. Tanya, if we leave the mass shooting aside, we will have a special discussion with our colleagues about this in order to see how we as the media community can respond to that challenge by improving some of our practices. We had a drastic case, and I think that it was drastic according to the greatest number of violations, the rape and murder of the girl from Ripon. And it is an illustration of everything that is bad, everything that should not be done. Yes. I want to mention this case specifically because in this entire sample, it was really striking because of this great brutality in reporting, and out of the 170 texts that we analyzed, 35 of them 1/3 or 1/4, 1/4, was in connection with this case. And what do journalists do? From the moment when the murder occurred in Ripanj to the trial, they monitored everything. They went to the place, and an entire gallery of photos was made with pools of blood and clothes that are scattered around. They go to the girl's house. They take photos of the house, of the girl's room with all her scattered things. They monitor the profiles on her social accounts on the social media. And she's no longer blurred. Now, all of a sudden, you can see her face everywhere in the media. They analyze her posts and messages. I have to say that a large number of texts regarding this case were created because journalists frequently visited family members, neighbors. They all spoke for the media. It's a question to what extent these people were aware of what they were doing and whether they were aware of the power of the media. Throughout that time, the media published very detailed reports about the perpetrator. His picture was fully visible in the media reports from the very beginning, to the speculations whether he drank blood on the graveyard, whether he was a sect member, a religious sect member, his sanity and other things. You could read about this all that time, and as the end, journalists went to the trial, which on this occasion was close to the public, but they stood outside of the courtroom, and through the door they listened to the witnesses shouting at each other, and whatever they could fathom out of those shouts, they put in their media reports. So I think it's very clear how this entire mechanism can function very brutally against people who come from complete anonymity and open their life to the public as a book. Thank you, Tanya, for this really dramatic presentation for the end. But I think that it's very important to understand how this mechanism works. Are there any questions from the audience or somebody who is watching us online? Yes? Good afternoon, and thank you for this extremely good panel. My name is Anna Mrokušić. I'm a communicologist. I have a master's degree from Norway in communicology. So I live in two parallel realities, in two universes, both when it comes to the media and virtual and whatever you would like to describe, and they're completely different. I have 1,001 questions, but I will ask just one very general, universal question. Since, unfortunately, my privacy was jeopardized both online and offline in many different ways that I don't want to talk about because my case is not important. Do you now, as participants in a public panel, where you are in a public space which is broadcast online and the recording will be available, do you feel like public figures in the legal meaning of the word as it is defined? Can somebody now treat you as a public figure in the same way as they treat actors and politicians, etc., etc.? And while I'm asking you, I'm shaking. Thank you. Thank you for your question. I would take all the questions that the audience has, and then we will respond. Are there any further questions from the audience? Good afternoon. The resistance of the audience not to receive this information, that we would prefer not to get them in future, attracted my attention. And that's why, actually, because of which we think that the public would be less traumatized. So can you tell us something about this process, how this works, and whether you think that other media might try to apply the same process that you started so that we can convince our audience that such contents are unnecessary? Jovan also had a question. It's more of a comment. We were not really precise when it comes to the privacy of public figures. I think that they have to endure a greater level of criticism, but the right to privacy is the same. And it was resolved in Strasbourg when Caroline of Monaco sued the journalists because her photos from a dinner were published, and she filed an application to the court in Strasbourg, and she won the case. And then we come to the fact that we're a small society, and that here we have to ask a question: what is a public figure? And this follows up on what you were saying. Do you feel like public figures? And since I know you, I can assume whether you do or not. And how many of us are actually condemned to becoming public figures because of different circumstances, because those who should appear as public, political commentators and analysts do not appear, and people from the media assume that role and become public figures. And this is something that we should take into account when we talk about this. Thank you, Jovan. Yes, Goce also. I apologize just briefly, and it follows up on what Jovana said, Gordon Novakovic, Press Council, regarding public figures. Since I think that Dragana mentioned that we will start, or we have started working on amendments to the Code of Ethics for journalists, one of the things that should be done is to define what a public figure is, because we very frequently have those situations in which people who are not public figures are regarded as public figures, and that reports on some private matters from private lives are justified by the fact that somebody is a public figure. This is what I wanted to say as a comment. But the question is addressed to Peter. Do you have some kind of analysis or an idea that when you publish a text that is cleared of everything that might be problematic, and when you publish a text that has all those elements, is there a visible difference in the number of clicks or reactions or comments, something that would tell us, once we publish this type of text, nobody reads this, or this difference is not so drastic? So I would like to know this when it comes to the education or the training of the audience. Let's start with the answers, and if somebody else wants to ask anything else, you can do this later. I read an analysis, and I think that it's not published yet, made by our colleagues from Partner Serbia regarding court cases on privacy violations in Serbia. It has been. Okay, I apologize. Here, the situation is a bit less precise. This is one of the things that colleagues pointed to. We need to take into account how previous cooperation with the media is assessed. The court very frequently takes into account whether that person had previous cooperation with the media or not. And I think this frequently referred to cases concerning people from the showbiz area. So the question to all of you is whether you feel like public figures. I don't feel like a public figure, but I have to say that I'm deliberately addressing the public. It was very important for me to present the results that we have received in the public, because we can contribute to the issues of the code and all the other things. But after that, I will gladly go back to my anonymity. Now, this was my decision because I thought that this was very important for all of us. Alexandra, the professors, public figures, yes, absolutely. There's a phrase, public intellectuals, and I always wonder what kind of intellectuals are private individuals or secret individuals as opposed to public. I think that it's our academic duty and obligation to be present in the public, in the field of our expertise, and to take part in the public life and to contribute to it. And that's why I think that my participation in the media and participation in panels such as this one is needed and valuable, because you're trying to shed light or to interpret some things that are not known well enough, or to raise some issues that are not raised. And this sends a special message to my students of journalism. And yes, I think that I'm a public figure. Peter? Well, when you're a journalist, when you sign your name underneath a text, or when you stand in front of the cameras or take part in public events and advocate something or talk publicly, yes, we are public figures. And what the definition is and where a right to privacy is, well, there should be some public interests, and what you're advocating publicly should not be opposed to what you're doing somewhere else. There should be some kind of a line, but I don't think that I am not supposed to be criticized, which is not the same as violation of privacy. Yes, that's a separate issue. What is the threshold? Should I drink something more when I go to a party, or should I go to, I don't know, some kind of a beach or something? Since I represent an institution here, the institution is a public figure, and I'm here as a representative of that institution. And as Russell Crowe would say in the movie, my name is Gladiator. Just one sentence. I agree with Peter. If we work publicly and sign our name somewhere, yes, we are public figures. But where are the limits? Where our public work is limited, this is where the actually line between the private and the public ends for us. I would like us to say something about how media educate the public. I would like to hear the answer to that question from Alexandra, sorry. This was Gotze's question. It was addressed to Peter, but maybe we should say something about whether media should give everything they want to everything that people want to the people. When you said if we omitted everything that's supposed to be omitted, we would see only a year. That was a joke. And then you listen to the audience, and then they say, well, we want to see everything. Why are you changing your course? That's all great and fine, but we're talking about the power of the media, and everybody in this room knows this. The power of the media is to educate, to actually misuse its position. We are not talking about who is guiding the media, what centers of power are hidden behind it. I would always say that this is the circulation, money, profits. Of course, there's not a single state with ideal media. Media have never been perfect in mass murder cases or crime cases. But the question is what you're doing as media. We're talking about the price of privacy. If you, as an editor or as a journalist, think about the fact that the family members or the child of that person will read about this in 10 years, and if you think about how your child would feel in that case, and we talked about how this remains in the public sphere unless somebody requests it to be deleted, but it's a question what remains written in that sense online.
So the key message is that the media absolutely have to. We cannot say our media is what our society is or what our state is. This cannot be an excuse. The media have to pave the way, and they have to say, now with these embellished titles or decent titles, we will offer you an option, because then you will not be traumatized by finding the title that somebody raped a child and this and that. And this drags even people who are not interested in this world. They're dragged into this violence spiral. That happened when interviews were published on cover pages or on YouTube, interviews with rapists, and you can say, I'm sensitive to that. I'm a female, or I have a daughter, or somebody close to me has a daughter. So, and I'm talking about somebody who has been in journalism for many years now. I teach at the Faculty of Political Studies and teach television reporting, and my students ask me, should I? Well, you should. You have to, but you have to hide the identity, to pick the angles that will not disclose the identity. So we have to talk at this level at which we are talking today. It's wonderful that you invited ethics managers and representative of the Office of the Commissioner for Equality, and that's important to me. That's the key message, that media outlets are important there. And precisely because they have power, everybody else wants to control them, and that's the spiral that is present. So it must be up to the media outlets. They have to take a decision that they want it differently. The system is there to make recommendations. Well, if we want to have a better society, yes. This code of ethics has to become a Bible for all journalists, and before that, no change will be possible. Peter, have you analyzed what Gotze mentioned? I have no answer to this question. This clickability is maybe contrary to a certain extent to what I'm doing. It shouldn't affect my job. And when we talked about journalists against violence, and Joanna was there, we tried to carry out some analysis. So we have this standpoint that there will be no clickbites in the title, that what is in the title has to be in the text. But real life is real life. We have a bunch of these things on a daily basis, and then it's been done all over again, and people get used to it, then you have to reduce it. And I owe an answer to the question, should we have more such managers? I believe that each media outlet should have this post and this functionality. So when you're working on something, the result will come. Sometimes slower, sometimes faster. And I see, for example, that people are running away from me in the corridors, and I'm just waiting for the nickname censor. Do they listen to what you suggest? Well, in most of the cases they do, but So it's much better, but it is better, but it happens that people see you and say, you know, this yesterday that was really harsh, but it's different when they see you, when they know that there is somebody who is watching over their shoulders and talking about what should be done, and that somehow gets to them, maybe not immediately, but over time. We lost track of time a little bit, and I'm known for keeping track of time. So I'm really sorry that I have to interrupt this very interesting debate. We'll continue it over coffee. Thank you for participating, and big thanks to the audience that joined us. Obviously, it's a question that requires a lot of discussion, so that we can arrive at a point where we will know that some trends have changed. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Dragana, and many thanks to all the panelists. This panel is the end of the first day of our Privacy Weeks, and we are inviting you to monitor us and watch us after 11 o'clock. Until then, visit the site, read the news about privacy, and always choose privacy.